June 19th, 1865, the day the last slaves in America got the news.
We're free. It gives you goosebumps.
Nearly 160 years later,
it is a celebration.
Milwaukee hosts one of the nation's longest-running festivals, marking Juneteenth.
This holiday is about all of us.
This week on Open Record, a divided city is invited to a single Jubilee.
We are all Americans, and we need to come together.
From the FOX6 studios, this is Open Record. I am Brian Polson, and I am joined by Open Record's executive producer has vacated her chair this week because we are joined by FOX6 News anchor Mary Stoker-Smith, making her Open Record debut. Welcome to the podcast, Mary.
So glad to be here.
It's about time.
Where's the confetti? I figured
I don't know.
Something, I
There
like
should
being
have
a little
been.
bit bedazzled for our esteemed guests, really.
And
But
speaking of guests, we are joined by a couple of very special guests this week. We have from Northcott Neighborhood House in Milwaukee, organizers of Milwaukee's 53rd annual Juneteenth celebration. That's right, 53rd, right? Yeah. We have Tony Kearney, executive director of Northcott Neighborhood House. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you for it.
Yeah, and we also have George Ackman, co-chair of the Juneteenth Day Jubilee Parade. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Thank you for having us.
Welcome to the podcast, George. We are recording this episode on Wednesday, June 5th for release on Thursday, June 6th. And we are, as we record, 2 weeks away from really, a pretty big day for you guys. It is the 53rd annual Juneteenth Day celebration in Milwaukee, one of the oldest Juneteenth celebrations in the country. But it's been a long road to where we are now from that day in 1863 when President Abraham Lincoln first issued his Emancipation Proclamation, the beginning of the end of slavery in America. And then the day in 1865 when the last slaves learned they were free. From Civil War to celebration, we're going to talk about all of that when we come back after the break. Over the next couple of weeks, we are going to be hearing a lot about the upcoming Juneteenth Day celebration in Milwaukee, including a parade and a festival, and we're going to talk a lot about that today, guys. But I want to start with some history. A lot of people, I think, associate the end of slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation, but it was far from ending there. In fact, it was another 2 years before the last slaves in America finally learned the war was over and that they were free. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and how Juneteenth, as we know it, came about?
As you know, there was a bloody war fought. 2 years later, after the end of the war, General Granger and his troops had to ride into Texas and let the slaves know that they were free, that you've been free for 2 years. Now, what I would like people to remember is that that didn't just change things. The general saying, hey, you're free, didn't cause people to say, okay, you can leave my plantation. Those troops had to enforce freedom. And as we know, freedom has never been free. So it wasn't an easy transition. But the celebration came about because those folks found out that they no longer had to toil in fields, be subjected to whatever atrocities that were occurring at that time. So it leads to another thing, which ultimately became Jim Crow.
right. And exactly, there was this, I'm sure, feeling of, okay, now what? But first, let's celebrate the fact that we're free. Can you imagine what our ancestors felt when they heard that? We're free. It gives you goosebumps when you think about the institution of slavery, the shackles from every form of discrimination to we're free, what that must have felt like, even for 5 minutes.
Well, if you look at it from just that person who now can do whatever he or she wants, can go wherever he or she wants to go, it's got to be wonderful. It's got to be the young kid who has those very, very strict parents who's now off to college. I'm free. I can go do what I want to do.
I can have ramen for dinner, right?
Yeah. But I think most of all, it was now my children no longer have to endure what I've endured.
Right.
that there is a future. I think that was what most of them would have felt. Mm-hmm. George, what do you think?
Yeah, similar to what you have shared, Mr. Kearney. In my opinion, I would imagine it was very liberating and had to be a joyful feeling to know that you're no longer shackled or in chains and enslaved, and that you get to finally have a taste of freedom, no matter if it was shortly after or, understanding that your future is a lot brighter than it has previously been. And so I just can only imagine it being a very, joyful moment. Sometimes there's tears of joy as well as, joy in terms of being able to smile, laugh, and ultimately look back on, the struggle that I experienced. I've now overcome it.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about how long it took. This wasn't an instant flip of the switch. Hey, everything's great now. In fact, in many ways, we are still dealing with, they're still reckoning over things that date all the way back to before the Civil War in this country. But I think of, there were, I was looking at the Library of Congress as I was researching for this podcast, and there are recordings of people who received that news in Galveston and in other places around the country, interviewed many years later when they were much older, 40, 50 years after they received this news. They're interviewed in the 1930s or 20s. But they're asked, do you remember, like you said, well, how did you feel? Mm-hmm. And in some ways, there was almost a sense, I think, for some of confusion. Well, what does this mean now? Where do we go? What do we do? Do I stay and work on this plantation? Do I go do something else? So while there ultimately probably was this great experience of maybe joy and excitement, there might have also been a lot of fear and confusion. Is that fair to say? Is that what I'm gathering from that?
I would agree that there was some apprehension in terms of what's next. There wasn't an exodus plan from Galveston or anywhere else in the South. And there were those who wanted to prevent any exodus from the South because the slaves were largely responsible for the Southern economy. That if they were gone, then you have issues with cotton crops, sugar crops. So there was a struggle. And yes, there was apprehension. Where do we go? Do we run to California? Do we run to Canada? How do I remove myself from this? And then there are those who, well, Galveston was their home. How do I make a world for me and my family here in this environment? So, yeah, it was difficult for the majority of them to make a decision as to how they were going to go forward.
So Juneteenth is June 19th. That's the day that you talked about the troops riding into Galveston and telling them the slaves they were free. So that's the day that's commemorated. But it's not as though there were annual Juneteenth celebrations nationwide in 1866 and forever thereafter. How did that evolve over time and get to where we are today?
Over time, people recognize the date. Galveston, for us here in Milwaukee, Margaret Henningsen is the person who brought that to Milwaukee. So she had actually been at a celebration in Georgia. And really, her grandmother had told her about Juneteenth.
So she's hearing stories from grandma about this.
And so when Miss Henderson returned to Milwaukee, she talked about it. How do you start this? And she got a small group together and made it happen. So the very first Juneteenth was put together largely by a very, very small group. Our current team is 53 that puts Juneteenth together.
Now that was it. So that was 1972. Am I right about that?
Yes.
I don't want to admit this, but 1972 was the year I was born. That's how far this goes back. I'm not a young man. So that wasn't. I mean, it wasn't happening all over the country, right?
No,
I
it
mean,
wasn't. It wasn't important, and there were a lot of things going on with the civil rights movement. So this, just to be able to have this event, was a struggle.
And the fact that we had it, but then it all of a sudden grew into, we have long touted this as one of the biggest celebrations in the country here in Milwaukee. Northcott had a big role in that without a lot of help and with a small staff. How did that come about, would you say, George?
I would like to make a point of order really quickly. I believe it was 1971 since the
Okay, all right, fair enough. So even before me.
We're going to give you a year, Brian.
I don't think Miss Margaret Henderson, as well as Alderman Ben Johnson, who at the time helped get the permit to have that festival, they want us to accurately, speak to those things. But it's out of the spirit of being a prideful people and wanting to celebrate freedom. And I think that in this country, we're founded on the premise of freedom. And so it's important to make sure that you establish and continue to build on traditions, whether that's, Miss Margaret being able to, learn about this from her grandmother and ultimately bring it to Milwaukee, and then having, Northcott, to help organize and make this a grand celebration. But in my humble opinion, I think Mr. Kearney would be an excellent person to speak to Northcott's involvement. As a young man, I just, count it a privilege and take a great pleasure with being able to support Northcott and making sure that we have this as a historical celebration in our city. And it's just a testament of being able to stand the test of time. To be able to do this for, as long as Brian here has been living.
And we all know that's a long time.
Yeah, that's a very long time.
I want to take a quick break, and when we come back, I do want to talk about Northcott's role in this, and I want to talk about the evolution of Juneteenth as a celebration across the country and as a holiday, an actual official holiday, and we'll do that when we come right back. We talk about Juneteenth and how it's evolved over time. Milwaukee has one of the oldest celebrations in the country and one of the biggest, largely because of Northcott neighborhood. You mentioned Margaret Henningsen. She was working for or volunteered for Northcott at the time, right?
Yes.
So really, it's Northcott that started this. How did that come about? And why I think of Milwaukee, we're in the North. We were the Union, and this is something, Juneteenth has long been something that was celebrated in the South and really not thought of much in the North. How did Milwaukee come to play such a big role in this event?
Well, it was because Miss Henningsen had that
Connection
with Georgia. And she came back and she talked about it. And the executive director at the time said, okay, let's do it. But you got it. So
now, do you guys know much about that first Juneteenth and what it was like?
Miss Henningsen and a young lady named Jan Kemp were the spearheads for it. And the event actually ran until midnight the first time.
Oh.
If I read correctly, too, I think it was like it rained that day, right? And then the clouds broke.
Yeah.
And then huge turnout.
So it was a meant to be. And King Drive at the time, 3rd Street, was a very busy hub for African Americans anyway. Northcott's office was on King Drive at the time. And it was just a group of folks that were dedicated to making something happen, to say that, hey, African Americans do and have contributed to America. So my hat's off to her, because I don't think it would have happened had she not made that trip.
And just had the confidence as a woman, as a Black woman, to say, hey, we can do this here. I can't imagine there was a line down the street to help. What what do we want to do? Are we going to get support? Are we going to get resistance? That would have been my fear. Like, how is this going to be received? It's a celebration for some, not for everybody.
Well, yes, there was resistance, and Ben Johnson, who is a current member of Northcott's board, was the alder of the district at the time, and being a young alderman, it took a lot of guts for him to go fight for that permit.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of naysayers there. And there wasn't this group of African Americans on the Common Council that were supporting him.
Right. I'm sure.
Mary, I don't know about you. Did you celebrate Juneteenth growing up?
No, I was going to bring that up. And it wasn't because of, we don't want anything to do with it. We didn't know anything about it. We didn't know about the history behind it. We didn't know what it meant for not only for African Americans, but for the country. There was an ignorance that really wasn't taught in school back in the day. And I say ignorance meaning
Until probably very recently, in fact.
Exactly.
And I wonder about that. I bring that up because I say, for the longest time, for as long as anyone can remember, July 4th is America's Freedom Day. It's Independence Day. Everybody celebrates that. It's America's holiday. And I think for a long time, people who even knew of Juneteenth would say, well, that's a black holiday or that's a black celebration. And here we are today. It's a federal holiday for everyone. And Tony, I've seen you speak about this. How important is it for you for people to know Juneteenth is not a black holiday? It's everyone's holiday.
That is of paramount importance for everyone to understand that it is an American holiday. The events that led up to there being a Juneteenth involved America as a whole, all of us. And we walk under one flag, not two. Juneteenth has a flag to represent the day, but everyone who's an American is an American, regardless of race. You are an American, and this holiday is about all of us. We want to see every single person attend Juneteenth. It's your event. It is the African American community's opportunity to show the best of it to the rest of America, just as Mexican Fiesta is their opportunity to show that, hey, this is our culture, but we're still Americans. Whether you do an Italian fest, Greek fest, the reality is we are all Americans and we need to come together. Juneteenth is that opportunity for us, that we are offering that to everyone. Come, join us, because we're all Americans.
Well, and I think about Americans of all types. Their ancestors shed blood for that day to come.
Yes.
The Civil War, there was obviously a massive loss of life and a lot of people who sacrificed and fought to make that day happen. And that wasn't just Black Americans, it was everyone fighting toward that day. So it is America's holiday, but it's only recently become recognized that way. It was, I believe, 2021 when President Biden officially declared it as a federal holiday for federal employees. And over time, states have begun to, I think Texas was first, way back in like 1980 maybe. Mm-hmm. But it's only been in the last few years that most states have started to make this a state holiday. And as we sit right here, right now, Juneteenth is not a Wisconsin state holiday. I wonder how, knowing that, here in 2024, what do you think of that?
I think I'm going to trust that our legislature will get the message. Our governor gets the message. He's never missed a Juneteenth celebration. We received the governor's tourism award for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
When we look at this holiday, and of course, everything we're talking about, the celebration, there is a notion that we have this lost generation. There are kids that aren't going to appreciate the struggles that so many have had to go through to get them the freedoms that they have now. And a lot of this, we want to resonate with the young kids. It's not just a parade. It's not just a time to go get that great sweet potato pie, which, by the way, best sweet potato pie and peach cobbler you can get in the city is sold at Juneteenth. I know from personal experience.
Just a small aside.
Just a very small, but they're great. But in all seriousness, this isn't just about, this is a time to kick it and to get out with the friends. This is a time to really show reverence and respect to those who have come before us. How do we get that message to the kids of today, the 16, the 17, the 18-year-olds? Let's talk about it. We had some issues last year. We had some mayhem. We do not want that repeated, especially as a people. What do we do? Where do we start?
Where we should be starting is in our classrooms. We definitely need to be consistent in our homes. What we've done is create zones within Juneteenth. So there's a kid zone that 13 and unders are in. There's a veteran zone. And there's a teen zone. So we're trying to get the teens to, one, understand what Juneteenth's about, two, to focus on a day of peace. This is your history, your culture. You need to come together. We need to be focusing on loving each other and moving forward, because ultimately they, like young Mr. Atkin here, they're going to be running Juneteenth, and they're going to be deciding what the city of Milwaukee looks like going forward. We can continue to talk about segregation, or we can come together. And our young people tend to be less segregated than we are. So I feel that the older generation is more the problem than the solution in terms of let's work on segregation. The kids don't have that issue. When I was a student in MPS, I knew what schools I was going to. From elementary, middle school, high school, they were all in the community, and they were all predominantly African American. So seeing people who were not African American was a very rare occasion for me as a young person. As I got older, middle school, high school, playing sports, going around the state, then you start to see them more. But our kids don't have that experience now. They're going to school side by side. So we need to allow them to embrace each other. We need to allow them to simply be Americans, to really respect and love their culture, but understand that your culture is a part of this greater melting pot that is America. You don't have to diminish anyone to be who you are. I think our kids get that. We need to get that.
I think Juneteenth Day is a perfect example of an opportunity for that coming together. And I want to talk about things that are coming up on June 19th, things that are coming up leading up to Juneteenth Day, and we'll do some of that when we come right back. So Juneteenth Day, June 19th, this year that is a Wednesday. We're going to talk about what you have planned, but I want to just come back to what you said before the break, Tony, which is this idea that you said that the younger people get it. They get it. They're going to school together. They're side by side together. This is a day, again, I think some people might look at it and go, oh, Juneteenth Day, maybe someone from the suburbs goes, that's for them, that's not for me. I want to hear from you. What is your invitation to those who aren't in the city to say, come, welcome? What's your message to them?
I have the same message I've always had. This is an American holiday. Every single person is invited. We want all of America. We don't want just African Americans. We want all of America. We want African Americans to show the rest of the community who we are. But we're all Americans, and every single person's welcome. If you kind of look at where we are, our Juneteenth Planning Committee is diverse, because I opened it up. And we want everybody to help plan Juneteenth. We don't know everything. but we want to put on an event that Milwaukee as a whole is going to be happy it put on. We want to put on an event that America is going to look at and say, hey, those people down there in Milwaukee actually know what they're doing. They came together.
Do you have any other cities reach out to you and say, hey, can you help us plan an event like you do? I mean, you guys have got it. You're hitting a home run.
Actually, we've had some cities talk to us, and we actually, George, last year had a group of volunteers from Chicago for his parade. So they're trying to do something of their own in Chicago this year. But we can only tell them, you have to come together. You can't do it by yourself. You have to come together.
So George is the youngest person at the table, presumably.
Yes.
You're good with, social media and outreach. And, how do we get the message out to people as, to Brian's point, in Cedarburg, West Bend, maybe as far away as, Ozaukee County, or, coming from Oconomowoc. This is a celebration, because I do think there is some intimidation. Like, if being from La Crosse, where we had a very homogenous environment growing up, if I even told my sister about this, she'd say, what is that? What is Juneteenth? But there would also be some fear and apprehension that, am I invited if I'm not African American? If I don't have brown skin, am I going to feel like an outsider? How do we let people know that this is an inclusive event, one that people will feel welcomed at, and in fact, they're encouraged to attend? What would you say?
I would say that Juneteenth, especially here in Milwaukee, is in fact a celebration for all. And, we have community fun, family fun. There's delicious food, as you spoke to earlier. And, we have activities going in these different zones that we're really trying to take this to the next level. And, it's definitely something that we want to be able to unite not only the city of Milwaukee, Milwaukee County, and the state and beyond. But, my goal, or my vision, that I believe is a shared vision with our leader here, Mr. Kearney, is to make Milwaukee a premier destination across the country to come and celebrate Juneteenth. I think we have an outstanding celebration where, I've seen babies, born, and celebrate their first Juneteenth with their parents, all the way up to the senior zone that we have, now that we have all these different zones. So, there's opportunity to come and celebrate, as much as we want to make it about informing other folks and, educating other folks. It is a celebration, and we like to party. We like to have fun, and we're not necessarily going to, tailor this in a way where you should feel that this is not going to be a fun event, and that you need to be more concerned about other things, whether that's, how am I getting there? Where should I park? How safe is it? We've been very intentional about our planning. We have many community partners who have been meeting all throughout this calendar year, to ensure that we have a great celebration. And so if they don't feel welcome, I think that Mr. Kearney has been doing a great job of saying that, this is not just something that is only for the city of Milwaukee or our African American and Black community. We want everyone to feel invited, just as if you went down to Summerfest grounds and attended any other ethnic festival here in the city. And I know that there are, communities across the state. I went to UW-Madison, and they would have their own Juneteenth celebration. And so that the education piece, I feel like that's more important in the classroom. I feel like a lot of folks may not know Juneteenth, but they definitely know the Emancipation Proclamation. We just have to keep building on that and not stop there, so that we can continue to, help rectify the struggle that we've been experiencing as a people, and let everyone know that, it's something to be proud of, and that we are part of the history of this country. And, we're founded on a premise of freedom. So, I feel strongly that every American can rally behind that message and, that identity of being a free American.
You Badgers, of course, they had their own celebration. Of course they did. Brian, I was looking at this list. Brian and I were talking about this. To speak to that, you've got, besides the parade, which we'll talk about, there's there's a festival, there's the workshops, there's exhibits. This isn't just kind of, there's actually a veteran zone, as you said, the teen zone, senior zone. I mean, there's different zones. And then, all of this is going on the same day. But you also have to have some organization. There are a lot of volunteers who want to be a part of this as well.
How are you doing with that, by the way? Do you have the volunteers you need? We're looking?
We're always looking for more volunteers. We have over 160 volunteers. The parade alone uses about 120 volunteers because it's a 1.4 mile parade. And then we have our courtesy ambassadors, which are the street volunteers that you can find out where to get that pie from because they've got a map and can tell you exactly where that particular vendor is. But it's important for people to feel a part. And regardless of race, everybody's welcome. Everybody's welcome to volunteer. This is about all of us. So anyone who wants to volunteer, please call Northcott Neighborhood House. Unfortunately, the volunteer application on the website has been brought down because we had it up until the 3rd. Now we're just taking any phone calls.
But you'll still take calls. If people say, I want to help, I'm available.
Yes.
What kind of things do you have for people to do? What do you need that you are still looking for?
Well, for people to be involved, they can, one, be the courtesy ambassadors walking up and down the street. They could work in Kids Zone with younger kids. There's a skating rink, all kinds of games, carnival rides. So they could work with those younger kids, making sure that they're lined up or they get their prizes. There's Teen Zone, which we pretty much have full. So we don't need a lot of volunteers in Teen Zone. There's Senior Zone, which ain't no stopping us now. It's what our seniors are touting.
Oh yes.
So they're very big, and they're letting us know that they're there, and they want people to know that they're there. So there's an opportunity to volunteer in there. They have all kinds of things going on. Karaoke, bingo, all kinds of other little games, a couple of cart tournaments, Bid Whiz and spades. But that's that opportunity. Veteran Zone, if you are a veteran and you'd like to come over and volunteer in Veteran Zone, great, come on. Mm-hmm. This year's Grand Marshal for the parade is Major General Johnny Davis, who's a Milwaukee man. It's born and raised right here. So not many African Americans get to be major generals.
Yeah, hometown pride. And if I can interrupt, because you're bringing back so many memories, my favorite part of the entire event after the parade is walking down that street. It's like a family reunion. It really is. Even though you may not know anybody. My first year, I'm like, I don't know anybody. What should I do? Grabbed a friend, went down, and everybody's talking. And hey, how you doing? You're going to see people from the community. You're going to see people who, unfortunately, because we're all so busy, you only see once or twice a year. So it's a time to kind of reconnect. But I loved that feeling of, even though this is my first time, this is a lot of fun, and everybody was celebrating and everybody's in a good mood. And if there is no more incentive, I think it really does. We kind of joke about it, but it celebrates our heritage. I had never had sweet potato pie till I was in college. And so I remember taking one home to my dad, and my dad's, this is the best thing I've ever had. This is no pumpkin. This is no pumpkin pie. So you go and you get this food that really does celebrate the Southern cuisine that we had often, seen and grew up with, a lot of people. And it's such great food. They've got the pie. They've got I know there was okra there. I'd never had okra. It's actually delicious. So it's a chance even, hey, let me grab something and taste something I've never had before, or experience an exhibit that I've never seen before. It's really, I want to get people pumped up as it's first. Come do something that you hadn't seen. Is there anything new this year, George, that we can expect?
There are new things, but But I want to get back to your point about how this is a family reunion type of atmosphere. And you asked earlier about how can this be more inclusive. Oftentimes as African Americans and Black folks, we joke about the cookout or whatnot. And if you have an invite to the cookout, well, I'm here to tell you this is the cookout in Milwaukee. If you would like to be, invited or have your seat and be able to enjoy some of the delicacies that our vendors will be having, we want you to come. And this is, the official Juneteenth cookout or invitation to be able to come partake and just enjoy yourself and, get a taste of, our different cuisines. As far as things that are new, there's always something new. We have our pageant that will be taking place this week, Friday. We'll be on this week, Saturday, my apologies, where we'll be, expanding our Mr. and Mrs. Juneteenth honorees and Little Mr. and Little Mrs.
So this will be on. This is on the 8th. The pageant is okay.
This
So
Saturday,
so
yeah.
when this airs on Fox 6, it'll be the day before. But if you hear when this is first released, it'll be the Saturday. The 8th is the pageant. Okay. You also have Freedom Ball coming up. Is that right?
Yes.
Oh, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the Freedom Ball is an opportunity for us to introduce our young people. We're generally looking at the young people who've done something wrong. They're still in cars, they're shooting. What we want to do is to show people the positive young African Americans. So those young people are who we really are. They're not the 3% who's out here screwing up.
So you're showcasing these ones who are doing good, positive things at the Freedom Ball.
Yes. So there'll be a good time had at the Freedom Ball. There's some history things occurring at the Freedom Ball. We are acknowledging a Father of the Year, which in the African American community is extremely important to make sure that there are positive father figures, because if we look at the majority of young people who are engaged in negative activities, you might find that the large majority of them don't have a positive male figure in their life. We have a Community Commitment Award, which is awarded to a non-African American who's helped us. And that was based on, hey, look, the Underground Railroad worked because there were non-African Americans who were willing to risk their lives to make it work. So we give that award on an annual basis to a non-African American.
And this is Friday, June 14th. Is that
Friday,
correct?
June 14th, 6 p.m. at the Harley Museum.
And then we haven't said this, but the parade, I know you're a co-chair of the parade, and that is a really big deal. When and where is the parade? Obviously, it's on Wednesday, June 19th. Where's that happening?
Yes, so the parade steps off at 14th and Atkinson Avenue through the historical, I believe, Franklin Heights neighborhood, and it then marches down once you hit the Five Corners into the Harambe community, right down Martin Luther King Drive. The parade ends exiting east on Locust Street and Dr. Martin Luther King Drive. It begins at 9 a.m. and it will be live coverage until 11 a.m.
And then the festival is right after that, right after the parade?
Yes.
Okay.
And it goes till 4 o'clock?
Yes, the festival will run until 4.
Okay,
All right.
great.
We are going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to go off the record.
Fox 6 investigators demanding the answers you deserve because you matter.
All right, before we go off the record, actually, Tony, I know there's one more thing you wanted to address, something that Mary alluded to earlier, and that is safety at the festival. Tell me what message you want people to hear regarding safety.
Safety is of paramount importance. So law enforcement is heavily involved from day one in the planning of it. So we have members of the Milwaukee Police Department, Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department, and private security. So we pretty much have the grounds covered so we can respond to any situation. The anomalies, like as you mentioned after the festival last year, those are things that we're really trying to deal with. Kid zone is a nice safe zone. Teen zone where the young people are and they get the kind of ruckus, that we're heavily manning that area as well. But law enforcement will be walking the street in pairs of 3. And I will give our Milwaukee Police Department credit for being more involved in Juneteenth than looking to arrest someone. So I think it's a much better situation when you're communicating with people. We're less likely to have incidents, but we have sufficient force to respond to any incident.
To make sure this stays a day of peace and celebration, right?
Correct.
And to speak to that, before we get to that, how can we use this as a springboard to take that to beyond? Because we've got one celebration, we've got the pageant, we've got the ball, and we've got, of course, the big parade. And by the way, I'm looking forward to being an esteemed judge in this year's pageant on Saturday. But how can we take these 3 days and extend them to 365 days by reiterating this message of we're all in this together, peace?
Well, we've consistently tried to move beyond this being the single day to get our schools to understand. And for the pageant, for instance, we're reaching out to MPS schools to get them involved. Naturally, we found some pushback because we're having difficulty teaching them, so we don't want to deal with the rest of the stuff. But we're not going to give up on that. We're going to keep on pushing that issue that our kids need to be involved early. They need to be learning early. This is a part of America's history, and children need to understand it irrespective of color. It is a part of our history. So we can't talk about the Civil War and not talk about that. Okay, this is something good that came out of the war, that there's a celebration that slavery's over. We just have to push. We consistently have to push. One of the things we did to try to make sure that it didn't just die one day is we created a concert series. So in Clinton Rose Park, there's a concert every Saturday from 2 to 6. So we're bringing people together to hear the music, jazz and blues, because that's what we started with. So we're doing that every Saturday.
That's all throughout the summer.
All throughout the summer.
Wonderful.
A young man by the name of Frederick Collier is the chair of that particular committee. And we'll finish the concert series on August 31st with a gospel concert, because we'd like to send our young people back to school with God on their mind.
Well, I have to say, I'm making an executive decision, by the way. I don't think we're going to have time for Off the Record this week, and that's okay because we've had so much good stuff to talk about. I just want to focus on one last thing. Across the bottom of the screen throughout this episode, it has said the title of this podcast is Jubilee Day. And I think we talked about some real serious stuff here today, but kind of back to your spirit, George, this is a party. This is fun, right? I mean, this is something a lot of people are looking forward to. It's a Jubilee. This is something to celebrate, yeah?
Indeed. There will be, lots of celebration, lots of smiles, lots of laughter and hugs, whether you're getting that good plate or you're enjoying yourself. Honestly, I believe with the festival, at least, Kids Zone is the most, epic celebration to be able to take part in. They have carnival rides, a petting zoo, they have ice cream, they have a basketball competition between them and the fire department and MPD.
Ooh,
so,
there'd be some trash talking.
They have a skating rink.
That will be great. That's looking
Well,
funny.
we're just about out of time, but
Yes.
I'm going to take one more quick break, and we're going to wrap things up when we come right back.
Contact 6, making things right for you. If you have a problem, see if we can help. Go to fox6now.com or call 414-586-2666.
All right, we're out of time for this week. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. Tony Kearney and George Hackman, thank you so much for being here, and good luck with the rest of the planning you have. We're looking forward to Juneteenth.
Thanks for having us.
All right. As always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible, including our executive producer, Sarah Smith, our editor, Dave Machuda, and our chief photographer, manning the video switcher, Kale Zimney, and of course, to Mary Stoker Smith.
Pleasure.
Who I can't wait to have you back. Thank you, Mary.
Oh, I'll be back. Off the record next time with these
Next
guys.
time. There you go.
We'll do that.
With that, I'm Brian Polson, and we'll be back next week.